The car came off the cliff road already burning. It didn't slide. It didn't skid. It went through the guardrail like the guardrail was a suggestion, and then it was airborne, and then it was fire falling through darkness, and then it was nothing but a sound at the bottom of a ravine that made 3 grown men flinch. Suho got there first. He always got there first. That was his job, to be first, to be fast, to be the body between Kang Jae-hoon and anything that wanted to hurt him. But this time there was nothing to block. Just heat and metal folding in on itself and a smell that would sit in the back of his throat for years. "Sir," his voice didn't shake, it had learned not to. "Sir, we found the car." Jae-hoon was already walking. Not running. Kang Jae-hoon did not run, not even now, not even for this, but his stride had a violence in it that made the men around him step back. He stopped at the edge of the ravine and looked down at what was left. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. His wife had been in that car. Somewhere below him, in the wreckage, was the woman he had married 3 years ago in a ceremony that had cost more than most people's homes. The woman whose name was on his household registry, whose photograph sat untouched on a shelf he never looked at, whose voice he had not properly listened to in longer than he could admit. His wife was dead, and he felt the absence of what he was supposed to feel, and that absence was its own kind of horror. "Confirm it," he said, flat, controlled. "I want confirmation before anyone says her name out loud." Suho's jaw tightened. "Sir, the fire." "Confirm it." He turned and walked back to the car, and no one saw his hands were shaking until much later, when someone happened to look at the security footage from that night for an unrelated reason, and paused and rewound, and said nothing to anyone about it for 5 years. 3 years earlier, on a night that smelled like white lilies and money, Jasmine Carter had stood in a hotel suite in Seoul in a wedding dress that weighed more than her carry-on luggage, and she had been happy. That was the part that still made her flinch years later, not what he said, that she'd been happy right before he said it. "You look beautiful," Jae-hoon had told her, which was the first real sentence he'd spoken to her all night that wasn't logistics. "Thank you." She'd smiled at him in the mirror, still not quite believing this was her life. A girl from a 2-bedroom apartment in Southwest Atlanta, standing in $5,000 of silk, married to a man whose name made bankers sit up straighter. I know it's not a normal marriage, but I want you to know I meant every word out there today." Something had moved behind his eyes. She'd thought, for one soft second, it was warmth. It wasn't. "Don't get pregnant for me." His voice was even, business flat, the same voice he used to end negotiations. "I don't love you. I'm only marrying you because it was my mother's dying wish." The room didn't spin. That was the strange thing. Jasmine had expected it to spin. Instead, everything went very still, very sharp, like the moment right before you cut yourself and you already know it's going to hurt before you feel it. "Okay," she said. Not asterisk, "What did you just say to me?" Not tears. Just okay. Because Jasmine Carter did not fall apart in front of people who wanted to watch her fall apart, and something in his face told her that some small, ugly part of him was waiting to see if she would. She would not give him that. "I'm going to bed," she said, and walked past him into the other room, and did not cry until the door was locked and he could not hear her. And even then she cried quietly, efficiently, the way you cry when you've taught yourself that grief is not allowed to be loud. He never came to check on her, not that night, not most nights after. The marriage that followed was not cruel in the ways people expect cruelty. Jae-hoon never raised his voice to her. He never touched her without her permission, never embarrassed her in public, never gave the household staff a single reason to whisper about how he treated his wife. He simply erased her slowly, through absence. Dinners eaten alone at a table built for 12. Questions asked and half answered. A birthday remembered by his assistant, not by him. A hand that reached for his in the car and found nothing there because he was already looking at his phone. Jasmine tried. God, she tried. She learned Korean at night from an app on her phone so she could understand the whispered conversations at family gatherings that excluded her by design. She sat through business dinners where wives were meant to be decoration, and made herself indispensable instead, memorizing names, remembering which investor's daughter was getting married, filling silences that Jae-hoon left wide open like doors he refused to walk through. "You didn't have to do that," he told her once, after she'd smoothed over a disastrous toast from a drunk business partner with a joke so quick and so warm that the whole table had laughed and forgotten the insult. "I know I didn't have to," she'd met his eyes. "I wanted to." He'd looked at her a second too long that time, like he was trying to solve something. Then his phone buzzed and the moment closed like a fist. 2 years of that. 2 years of small moments that almost cracked something open, followed immediately by him shutting the door before it could. She started sleeping in the guest wing permanently in year 2. He never asked her to move back. It was in the spring of year 3 that Jasmine heard the sentence that ended everything. She wasn't eavesdropping. She wants that understood, even now, even in the retelling. She had walked toward the study to bring Jae-hoon tea, the way she still did some nights, some stupid, hopeful nights, because some small part of her had not yet given up. The door was open a crack. 2 voices. One was Jae-hoon's uncle, Kang Byung-ho, a man who had never once looked directly at her at any family dinner. The other was a man she didn't recognize. "The American wife is a liability," Byung-ho was saying. "She asks too many questions. She's smarter than Jae-hoon gives her credit for." "So what do you suggest?" "An accident wouldn't be complicated. A car, a road. These things happen to wives who know too much." Jasmine did not drop the tea tray. She wants that understood too. Her hands did not shake. She turned, silent, and walked back the way she came, and stood in the hallway outside their bedroom for 11 minutes before she let herself feel anything at all. She did not tell Jae-hoon, because some cold, clear part of her brain, the part that had survived 3 years of being erased, understood something simple. If her own husband's family was already discussing her death like a logistics problem, and her own husband had never once, not once, shown her enough regard to ask why she looked tired, or sad, or afraid, then telling him would not save her. She would have to save herself. Dr. Yoon Tae-ho had been the Kang family physician for 11 years. He had also, quietly, been the only person in that entire compound who had ever looked at Jasmine like she was a person and not an arrangement. "You look like you haven't slept," he told her, during what was supposed to be a routine checkup. "I haven't." "Jasmine," he set down his pen. He was the only person in Korea who called her by her first name without an honorific stapled to it, and it had taken her a year to stop flinching every time he did it, out of sheer gratitude. "What's going on?" She told him, all of it, the uncle, the word *accident, the years of silence that had worn her down to something she didn't recognize in mirrors anymore. Tae-ho was quiet for a long time. "There's a way to disappear," he finally said. "It's not clean, it's not easy, but I know people. And I have watched this family long enough to know that if Byung-ho wants you gone, being gone on your own terms is safer than waiting to see how he does it on his. And if I run and he catches me, then you were never safer here than you would be anywhere else." He looked at her, steady. "Jasmine, I am telling you as your doctor and as someone who has watched you shrink for 3 years, you are not safe in this house. You have not been safe in this house for a long time. The only question is whether you leave standing up or whether they carry you out." She thought of Jae-hoon's face on their wedding night. "I don't love you." She thought of 2 years of silence at a table for 12. She thought of a stranger's voice through a cracked door saying the word *accident like it was nothing. "Help me disappear," she said. The car went off the cliff on a Tuesday in early June. Tae-ho had arranged everything. The body of a woman who had died of natural causes days before with no family to claim her. The timing, the driver who owed him a debt from years back and would vanish into another province by morning. Jasmine watched the whole operation from 4 miles away, in a rented car with a new passport, a new name, and $11,000 in cash that Tae-ho had insisted she take. She watched the smoke rise into the dark and felt something break loose in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tethered. "I'm sorry," she thought, though she wasn't entirely sure who the apology was for. Maybe for the woman whose body burned in her place. Maybe for the version of herself who'd stood in that hotel's suite 3 years ago, believing a wedding dress meant somebody had chosen her. Maybe for Jae-hoon, a small, furious, traitorous corner of her mind whispered, for whatever it was he might feel, walking up to that wreckage. She shut that thought down hard. He didn't love her. He'd said so with his own mouth, on the one night she should have felt most wanted in her life. Whatever he felt standing over that fire wasn't grief for a wife. It couldn't be. She drove to the airport before dawn. First CTA. Okay, Queens, before we go one more inch further into this story, I need you to sit with me for a second, because if you just found this channel, if this is your very first time watching one of these with us, welcome. I mean that. You didn't stumble in here by accident. You walked into exactly the right room at exactly the right moment, because this story is about to break your heart in the best way. Tell me right now in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I want to know. I want to picture you curled up wherever you are, hearing this with me. And if this story has already got its hand around your throat the way I think it does, do me a favor and hit subscribe right now, before the tears start, because trust me, Queens, they are absolutely about to start. Atlanta welcomed her back the way home always does, a little rougher than you remember, a little more forgiving than you deserve. Jasmine rebuilt herself in pieces. She took the name Jada Reeves. She took a job at a small design studio for 6 months before she saved enough to rent a single chair in the back of a fabric warehouse. And from that single chair, she built a fashion line that started as nothing and, 4 years later, was anything but. Amara Johnson found her in year 1, an old college friend who recognized something in the tilt of Jasmine's head across a crowded market, even under a different name. Even after everyone in Jasmine's old life believed she was ash and bone at the bottom of a Korean ravine. I'm not going to ask, Amara had said the first night, over wine Jasmine could barely afford. Whatever you're running from, I'm not going to ask. I'm just going to help you not be alone while you rebuild. That kind of loyalty, offered with no conditions, no interrogation. Jasmine had wept over it more than she'd wept over her own wedding night, because it was the first time in years someone had given her something without expecting her to perform gratitude for it. By year 4, Jada Reeves Designs had dressed 2 actresses at award shows and had a wait list for custom pieces 6 months deep. Jasmine stood in the middle of her own studio, surrounded by fabric and mannequins and the low hum of sewing machines, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness, not yet, not fully, but peace. She should have known peace like that never lasted in her life, without a reason. 5,000 miles away, Kang Jae-hoon had spent 5 years running an empire with a hole in the center of it that he refused to name. He did not remarry. Byung-ho pushed candidates at him constantly, daughters of allies, women groomed since childhood for exactly this role, and Jae-hoon turned every single one away with a flatness that had, over the years, calcified into something the whole organization simply stopped questioning. You could have anyone, Byung-ho told him once, 4 years after the funeral that had no real body in the casket, though no one but Byung-ho and one hired driver knew that. Why do you insist on living like a monk in mourning for a woman who barely mattered to this family? Something in Jae-hoon's face went dangerously still. Careful, uncle. Byung-ho backed off. He always backed off, eventually, because even he understood there was a version of Jae-hoon that did not forgive certain sentences, and he had learned, mostly, not to test where that line sat. What Byung-ho did not know was that Jae-hoon had, in the 18 months after the funeral, quietly commissioned 3 separate investigations into the exact circumstances of the crash. Not because he suspected anything. Because grief, in men like Jae-hoon, did not announce itself as sadness. It announced itself as an obsessive, circling need to understand every second of the thing that had taken something from him he hadn't realized he'd wanted to keep. The investigations turned up nothing conclusive. A burned-out car. A body too damaged for extensive testing, cremated quickly per Korean protocol and a grieving husband's wishes. Wishes Byung-ho had personally, urgently encouraged. Jae-hoon let it go, or told himself he did. It was his mother's letters that changed everything. Lucia, no. Madame Han. Jae-hoon's mother, dead 6 years before the wedding even happened, had left a locked chest that her personal attorney had been instructed to deliver to Jae-hoon only after a 5-year mourning period following his marriage. A strange, specific instruction that no one had questioned at the time, because Madame Han had always been strange and specific about everything. Jae-hoon opened it alone, at night, in the study where a stranger's voice had once discussed his wife's death like a business decision. Neither of them knew he would one day almost overhear the echo of. The letters were dated across a decade, and they were about Jasmine before Jasmine had ever been anyone to him. My son, you do not remember the girl who pulled you from the river when you were 19 and reckless and half drowned on a trip you weren't supposed to take alone. You were unconscious. You never saw her face. But I did. I met her, years later, by accident so strange I still believe it was fate, and I recognized her immediately as the girl in the photograph the hotel security guard gave me the day it happened. I have watched her from a distance for years, my son. She is stronger than anyone I have ever chosen for you. When I am gone, you will marry her, and you will not understand why, and you will resent me for a decision that looks arranged and cold. But I did not choose her for convenience. I chose her because she already saved your life once, without knowing your name, without wanting anything in return. Be worthy of that, Jae-hoon. Please, for once in your life, be worthy of what you are given. Jae-hoon sat in that study until dawn. He had told her, on their wedding night, that he did not love her, that the marriage was obligation. He had believed, every single day after, that he was simply fulfilling a dying woman's arbitrary wish, an arrangement, nothing more, and he had treated Jasmine accordingly, with the careless efficiency of a man completing an assigned task. He had never known she was the reason he was alive at all. He had never known his mother had not chosen randomly. She had chosen the one person who had already, once, without recognition or reward, decided his life was worth saving. And he had spent 3 years erasing her, and 5 more years pretending her death was a tragedy that had happened to him rather than a wound he had carved himself with his own silence, his own coldness, his own refusal to see her. Something in Jae-hoon broke that night, and something else, slower and more dangerous, began to wake up in its place. Middle CTA. Queens, I need you to sit with me in this for a second, because we are at the moment in this story where everything cracks open, and I need to know where you land on this. Jasmine faked her own death and walked away from a 5-year marriage without ever telling her husband the truth about the threat against her life. She built an entire empire under a false name instead of trusting him, instead of fighting for the truth to come out. Was she right to protect herself first? No explanations owed to a man who never once made her feel safe enough to be honest with him. Or should she have found a way to tell him the truth before disappearing? If you are standing with Jasmine on this one, if you believe a woman owes a man nothing after years of being erased, hit that like button right now, because that like is you telling her you've got her back. And then get into my comments and tell me where you land, because queens, I have a feeling this comment section is about to split straight down the middle. It took Jae-hoon 4 months, 3 private investigators, and 1 increasingly reckless obsession to find her. He found her the way you find someone you're not supposed to still be looking for, by accident, almost. A magazine feature on rising American designers. A face in a photograph that made his chest cave in like a building losing its foundation, because 5 years had changed her hair, her clothes, the confident tilt of her chin, but it had not changed her eyes. Jada Reeves. He flew to Atlanta within 48 hours. She was standing in her studio, pinning a hem on a mannequin, sunlight cutting gold across the floor, when the bell above the door rang and she looked up, and every single ounce of blood left her face at once. "No," she said, quiet, immediate. "No, you don't get to be here." "Jasmine." "Jada." Her voice was steel now, 5 years of rebuilding herself compressed into 2 syllables. "My name is Jada. Jasmine died in a car 5 years ago. You buried her. You cried at her funeral, or at least I heard you did, which honestly surprised me, considering." You're alive. He said it like he still couldn't fully hold the shape of it. You've been alive this whole time. And you've been remarried, I assume. Moved on. Rebuilt whatever it is men like you rebuild. I never remarried. That landed somewhere in her chest she didn't want it to land. She hated that it landed at all. Why does that matter to you? She said. You told me, on our wedding night, in case you've forgotten, and I haven't, Jae-hoon, I have never once forgotten, that you didn't love me. That I was an obligation. So why exactly are you standing in my studio 5 years later looking like a man who lost something? His jaw worked. For the first time in the years she'd known him, Kang Jae-hoon looked like a man who did not have the words ready before he opened his mouth. Because I did lose something, he said. I just didn't understand what it was until it was gone. That's convenient timing. I found my mother's letters. He said it fast, like ripping off something that had been stitched into his skin. Jasmine, you saved my life, years before we ever met. A river, when I was 19. You pulled me out and you left before I woke up, and I never knew your face until my mother showed me a photograph after she died. She arranged our marriage because of that, not randomly, not as some cold business transaction. She chose you because you had already decided, once, with nothing to gain, that my life was worth saving. Jasmine's hands had gone still on the fabric. I didn't know that, she whispered. Neither did I, not until 4 months ago. His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. I spent 3 years treating the woman who saved my life like she was a debt I was paying off. I spent 5 more years grieving a version of you I invented in my head that was easier than admitting what I actually did to the real one. That doesn't fix it. Her voice shook now, finally, 5 years of composure straining at the seams. You don't get to walk in here with a dead woman's letter and undo 3 years of eating dinner alone at a table for 12, Jae-hoon. You don't get to undo the sound of a man's voice through a cracked door saying the word *accident like it was a scheduling conflict, while my own husband was 2 rooms away not noticing I hadn't slept in a week. I know. Do you? Something old and furious broke loose in her chest. I built this, she gestured at the studio, the fabric, the 4 years of exhausted, solitary work, alone, with $11,000 and a new name and no one checking if I was safe at night. I learned how to be a whole person without you, Jae-hoon. I am not the girl standing in that wedding dress anymore, waiting for you to love me back. I don't want that girl. His eyes did not leave hers. I want the woman standing in front of me right now, the one who is furious and has every right to be and built an empire out of the wreckage of what I did to her. I am not asking you to forgive me because I think I deserve it. Then why are you here? Because I needed you to know the truth, all of it, even if you never let me near you again. The bell above the door rang a second time, and a man neither of them recognized stepped into the studio with his hand already inside his jacket. And Jasmine understood, in the half-second before Jae-hoon shoved her behind him bodily, that whatever quiet life she had built in Atlanta had just run out of road. Choi Han-seo had been managing the fallout of Jae-hoon's 5-year obsession from the shadows for longer than anyone realized. Byung-ho's old ally, promoted quietly into the vacuum Jae-hoon's distraction had left behind, Han-seo had spent years consolidating power precisely because the boss above him was too busy chasing ghosts to notice territory slipping sideways. A wife returning from the dead was not sentimental to Han-seo. It was a liability with a name and a face, someone who might remember conversations, associations, the small details that could unravel 5 years of careful maneuvering. You should not have come here, Jae-hoon said, low and lethal, positioning himself fully between Jasmine and the gun barely concealed beneath the stranger's jacket. Whatever Han-seo sent you to do, walk out that door right now, and I will let you live to regret the choice you're about to make instead of the one you already made. The man hesitated, just long enough. Suho came through the door behind him. Jae-hoon's security had trailed him the entire flight, the entire drive. Some instinct that had kept a man beside him at all times these past 4 months without Jae-hoon ever fully articulating why. And Suho had the intruder disarmed and on the ground in 4 seconds flat. Jasmine stood frozen against the wall, chest heaving, staring at the man who had once told her he didn't love her now standing between her, and a bullet without a single second of hesitation. "You didn't even think about it," she said, once the studio had gone quiet again, once the police sirens were already audible in the distance. "You just moved." There was nothing to think about. His hands, she noticed, were shaking now, 5 years too late, in the doorway of a fabric studio in Atlanta instead of at the edge of a Korean cliff road. "There has never been anything to think about, Jasmine. I was just too much of a coward for 5 years to admit that the answer was always you." The truth came out over the following weeks in pieces, the way truth usually does, through Suho's careful digging, through the arrested gunman's terrified cooperation, through documents Han Seo had been sloppy enough to leave traceable in his hunger to consolidate power while Jae-hoon was distracted. Byung-ho had ordered the original threat 5 years ago. The conversation Jasmine overheard through a cracked door had been real, had been exactly what it sounded like. And Byung-ho, furious and frightened when Jae-hoon's 4-month search became impossible to hide, had quietly reached back out to old allies to finish what he'd started years before Jasmine's disappearance had interrupted it. Han Seo had simply seen opportunity in his uncle's panic and used it to move his own pieces into place. Jae-hoon dismantled both of them with a coldness that made even his most loyal men take a half-step back. Not the reckless fury of a man protecting territory, but the surgical, unhurried precision of a man who had already lost the most important thing in his life once, through his own blindness, and did not intend to lose anything else through anyone else's malice. Byung-ho was expelled from the organization entirely, stripped of position, sent into an exile with no allies left willing to catch him. Han Seo did not survive his own ambition. The details of that were handled far from any studio in Atlanta, and Jasmine never asked, and Jae-hoon never offered. "Power no longer comes before family," Jae-hoon told what remained of his inner circle, in a meeting that restructured the entire foundation of an organization built for 3 generations on the opposite principle. "If you cannot understand that distinction, you no longer have a place beside me." Nobody argued. Jasmine did not move back to Seoul. That was her condition, stated plainly, the week after Han Seo's threat had been neutralized and the immediate danger had passed. "I built something here," she told Jae-hoon, standing in the studio that was hers, entirely hers, built from nothing but her own hands and Amara's loyalty and $11,000 of borrowed courage. "I am not walking away from Jada Reeves' designs to become somebody's wife again in a house where I eat alone." "I'm not asking you to," Jae-hoon had learned, in the weeks since the studio, to speak slower, to leave space, to let her set the pace instead of assuming he understood her needs before she voiced them. "I'm asking for the chance to build something new. Here, if that's what you need. Seoul, if you ever want it. I don't care where the address is, Jasmine. I care about not spending the rest of my life eating dinner across from an empty chair, understanding exactly what that emptiness cost me." "That's not nothing," she admitted. "But it's not everything either. You don't get 5 years back by saying the right things in a fabric studio." "I know. So we go slow." She looked at him, steady, the way she'd once looked at him across a table for 12, still hopping, before hope had cost her everything. "I'm not the girl who needed you to love her to feel like she existed. I know I exist now. Whatever this becomes, it happens because I choose it every day, not because I have nowhere else to go." "I would not want it any other way." 6 months later, in a small courthouse in Atlanta, with Amara standing as her only witness and Suho standing as his, Jasmine and Jae-hoon renewed vows that had nothing to do with any dying woman's wish, and everything to do with 2 people who had, finally, chosen each other with open eyes. "Whether we have children or not," Jae-hoon told her, voice steady, hands no longer shaking, "the only thing I want is a life where you never again have to question your place beside me." Jasmine did not cry the way she had 5 years ago, alone, quietly, behind a locked door. She cried the way you cry when someone finally sees you completely and chooses to stay anyway, and the tears do not have to be hidden from anyone at all. She kept the studio. She kept the name Jada Reeves for her business and Jasmine Carter Kang for the life built underneath it. A woman who had died once on a Korean cliff road and been reborn twice, once alone, in an empty rented car with a new passport, and once again, 5 years later, standing in the sunlight of a studio she had built entirely with her own 2 hands. Final CTA. Queens, I need a moment with you before we close this one out, because I know exactly what you're feeling right now, and I am feeling it too. Jasmine chose to build an entire empire alone rather than ever depend on being saved. And when Jaehoon finally showed up, she still made him earn every single inch of her trust back instead of falling into his arms just because he said the right words. Tell me, do you think a woman should ever let a man back in after years of silence, even if the truth turns out to be more complicated than either of them knew? Or is some silence unforgivable, no matter what caused it? I want you to subscribe to this channel, Queens, because this is where we tell these stories the way they deserve to be told, with the twists you don't see coming, and the women who never lose themselves waiting to be chosen. And if this story cracked something open in you tonight, send it to another woman who needs to hear that she can walk away, rebuild everything alone, and still get to decide, on her own terms, in her own time, whether love gets a second chance. I'll see you in the next one, Queens.